Mill's main argument for his one very simple principle depends on his ideas about individuality. One way to think of this is that Mill wants to maximize human flourishing. And that means, in part, removing the obstacles to individual flourishing. Now, what does he think these obstacles are? Well, one of the major obstacles he sees is mass conformity. Okay? That is, he worries that in the modern era, right, even if people aren't technically restricted from doing things, the pressure of public opinion, public disapproval, private interference, etc., makes people afraid to try new things or to really express their individuality, and hence they won't flourish as much as they might. Okay. Now, of course, this is not all about the law. Right? It's also about how society acts outside of the law. But the law makes a difference. When we start making various things illegal, right, that can reinforce this pressure towards mass conformity. So to illustrate his concern, right, I'd like to use an example. Right? And this example involves someone I'll call John Doe. Now let's assume that John Doe could have a very rich life. I don't mean rich in money, I mean rich in experiences. And he could experience some what Mill considers deeper or higher pleasures. And he could be much more fulfilled if he were to discover the joys of appreciating abstract art. Okay. So let's assume that representational art doesn't do all that much for him. But if he got into the world of abstract art, it would really expand his horizons. He'd have a more fulfilling life. Right? Now let's assume he's probably not going to ever get inspired by more realistic Renaissance painters. Right? And so he'll spend his time doing sort of popular activities, right? He kind of likes playing darts. He kind of likes watching TV, right? But he doesn't do anything really challenging or that really makes him grow in a certain way. So now why would restrictions on liberty tend to prevent him from attaining this kind of fulfillment? Well, there's a couple ways. One would be the pressure to conform, right, pushes him against trying to appreciate something experimental. He doesn't want to seem weird or different, and there's a lot of social stigma towards doing so. Right? You can imagine a somewhat puritanical society, right, for lack of a better word, a society that has certain standards and frowns very much on any kind of experiment in the artistic world. Right? Well, that might mean that John Doe is discouraged from ever trying these new kinds of activities because he doesn't want this social rejection. Alternatively, it might be the case that we just don't get much good abstract art, right, because people don't want to patronize it because it's so frowned upon by the majority. Right? Or that artists who could be great abstract artists get steered in another direction and become mediocre representational artists. Right? All these kinds of things, or simply that nobody wants to sponsor shows and things like that. I remember asking a teacher once, my band conductor actually, in college, I said, why is it that it seems like there's so little support for wind ensembles and band music as opposed to orchestral music? And he said the public just won't go to it. Right? The public just won't accept it as part of classical music in the way that they'll accept orchestral music. Right? And he just saw this as a prejudice of the public, but one that was going to influence where funding goes, right? And also where concert goers are going to go to. So Mill is worried, right, that this mass conformity will tend to suppress individuality. And he's mainly concerned about two things. One is that the great geniuses will be hampered by this in various ways so that they won't be able to produce things and demonstrate that new things that seem crazy could work, like some new form of abstract art, which a lot of people would dismiss, right, but could turn out to have some real depth to it. The other concern is that the average person won't be willing to experiment or give a chance to these new things that the great geniuses develop, right, because they're made afraid by the pressure of public opinion. I've chosen an example involving the arts, but it could go towards various experiments in lifestyle as well. Okay, so it might be that a more agrarian lifestyle would be agreeable to a lot of people, but people are afraid to go against the trend. Okay, it could be that a tendency towards being more polite or less polite, some kind of change in manners could make everyone happier. But again, people are afraid to buck public opinion. So that's Mill's concern. He thinks that in order to allow for the fullest expression of individuality, right, we need to allow the greatest possible liberty consistent with protecting other people from harm.